There are moments in international diplomacy when the most dangerous variable is not the missile, the sanction, the blockade, or even the enemy across the table. Sometimes the most dangerous variable is the man who believes the table exists for him. That is the real story behind Donald Trump's latest Iran crisis. The surface narrative is familiar. The United States and Iran are close to a deal, the Strait of Hormuz may reopen, nuclear issues may move into a 60-day negotiation window, regional markets are waiting for relief, and world leaders are trying to keep a fragile process from collapsing. On paper, this is a story about war and diplomacy, but underneath it is also a story about ego. According to reporting cited in the source material, Iranian officials allegedly became so concerned about Trump's behavior, public statements, and negotiating style that they sought psychological guidance in how to communicate with him. That does not mean outsiders can clinically diagnose the president from afar. It does not mean every explosive label thrown around by political commentators should be accepted as medical fact. Serious mental health assessment requires direct evaluation, professional standards, and caution. But the political meaning of the claim is still enormous. If foreign negotiators believe the American president is impulsive, unstable, overly sensitive to humiliation, or driven by personal symbolism, that perception itself becomes part of the negotiation. Whether or not the perception is medically accurate, it changes how adversaries behave. They do not negotiate only with America's military power. They negotiate with what they think motivates the person holding that power, and that is where Trump becomes dangerous. Not because a foreign government says he is mentally unwell. Foreign governments insult presidents all the time. Not because commentators describe him in extreme terms. American politics is already overheated with that kind of rhetoric. The danger is that Trump's own public behavior gives adversaries a playbook. Flatter him, time things around his ego, challenge his sense of dominance, exploit his fear of looking weak, and watch him make the negotiation about himself. That is exactly what appears to have happened around the Iran deal. Trump wanted the agreement signed on his birthday, not merely finalized when the parties were ready. Not simply concluded when the text was settled, the verification terms were clear, and the regional actors were aligned. He wanted it on a symbolic day, his 80th birthday, the day he could turn diplomacy into a personal triumph. That matters. A peace deal is not a birthday gift. It is not a television finale. It is not a trophy to place beside a UFC spectacle on the White House lawn. If a deal is real, it should be judged by its terms, its durability, its verification, its impact on regional stability, and its ability to reduce suffering. But Trump's insistence on timing made the process look less like statecraft and more like event planning. Iran noticed. Iranian outlets and officials pushed back on the idea that the agreement would be signed on Trump's preferred schedule. They reportedly framed his insistence on a Sunday signing as strange, even childish, because it appeared tied to his personal need for a birthday victory lap. That kind of perception is devastating for an American president. It tells the world that adversaries do not see him as the master negotiator he claims to be. They see him as someone whose vanity can be studied and used. That is the collapse of leverage. Trump's entire foreign policy brand is built around the idea that he is unpredictable in a way that terrifies enemies. But there is a thin line between strategic unpredictability and emotional volatility. Strategic unpredictability keeps adversaries off balance because they cannot calculate your next move. Emotional volatility gives adversaries a map because they know exactly which buttons to push. If Trump needs the deal on his birthday, Iran can deny him that symbolic win. If Trump needs to say the Strait of Hormuz will reopen immediately, Iran can slow walk the terms. If Trump needs to claim there will be no money involved, other parties can route financial relief through intermediaries or development funds and let the details leak later. If Trump needs to look tougher than Obama, Iran can force him into the same basic reality that every American president eventually faces. Nuclear diplomacy is hard, imperfect, technical, and slow. This is what the source text is really attacking. It is not merely saying Trump is behaving strangely. It is saying his personal psychology has become a geopolitical liability. Look at the sequence. At a delicate moment, when reports suggested Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other regional actors were sending positive signals, Trump posted a long message comparing his prospective Iran agreement to Obama's JCPOA. He claimed Obama's deal was an easy road to a nuclear weapon, while his deal would be a wall against one. He declared that Iran no longer wanted a nuclear weapon. He said the deal was scheduled to be signed the next day. He said the Strait of Hormuz would open immediately after signing. That is not just diplomacy. That is public self-congratulation before the deal is secure. And that creates risk. When a president announces terms before all sides confirm them, he gives opponents a reason to contradict him. When he claims a deal is scheduled before Tehran agrees publicly, he turns the other side's denial into a humiliation. When he frames the agreement as a personal victory over Obama, he makes the deal less about regional peace and more about his own vanity. When he adds threats at the end, he introduces fear and instability into a process that requires discipline. The most alarming part was his reference to the ultimate alternative. In the context of Iran, nuclear weapons, B-2 bombers, buried material, and a war that has already shaken global energy markets, that phrase was widely interpreted by critics as a veiled nuclear threat. Whether Trump meant it literally or as bluster, the effect is corrosive. A president cannot casually hint at unimaginable force while also asking the world to believe he is calmly closing a peace agreement. This is the contradiction Trump never escapes. He wants credit for peace and credit for menace at the same time. He wants the markets to believe stability is coming, while also reminding Iran of the most extreme military option imaginable. He wants Americans to feel relief, while posting in a way that makes the world wonder whether the deal could collapse over ego, language, or impulse. He wants to say he is stronger than Obama because he bombed first, but he still needs Iran to cooperate with a negotiated framework. That is not strength. That is instability dressed up as dominance. The source text also highlights another key issue. Trump appeared to describe terms that may not match the actual framework being discussed. He claimed there would be no money exchanged, but outside reporting suggested sanctions relief, frozen funds, and broader financial arrangements were part of the picture. He talked about going in to retrieve or destroy nuclear dust buried under mountains, with references to B-2 bombers and pilots. But the actual framework reportedly left the detailed nuclear questions for a 60-day window of negotiations, including downblending highly enriched uranium and future monitoring. That gap matters because diplomacy lives in details. The public slogan may be no. Who verifies it? When does the process begin? What happens to enriched uranium? Who monitors compliance? What sanctions relief is granted? And when? What happens if Iran violates the agreement? What role do international inspectors play? What do Israel and Gulf states accept? What does Congress get to see? What is binding, and what is merely aspirational? Trump's style is to leap over the details and announce the ending. But Iran, markets, allies, and adversaries all live in the details he tries to skip. That is why the social media posts are so damaging. They are not just embarrassing. They may actively weaken the negotiation. If Trump publicly oversells the deal, Iran has to protect its own domestic positions. If Trump threatened correcting or slowing the process, Iranian hardliners can say Washington cannot be trusted. If Trump says no money is involved while financial relief is being discussed, any later disclosure looks like deception. If Trump frames the deal to avoid giving him the image of Tehran, Tehran has every incentive to avoid giving him the image he wants. This is diplomacy sabotage by branding. The tragedy is that ordinary people need the deal to work. Americans need relief from energy shocks. Families need gas prices to come down. Markets need stability. People in the Middle East need the bombing to stop. Sailors, shipping companies, and global supply chains need the Strait of Hormuz open. Civilians in Lebanon, Iran, Israel, and across the region need leaders to stop treating war as theater. That is why the anger in the source text is so intense. It comes from the sense that Trump is playing with people's lives and livelihoods while obsessing over his own image. A disciplined president would lower the temperature. He would stop posting. He would let negotiators work. He would avoid personalizing the deal. He would not taunt Iran. He would not turn the agreement into a birthday spectacle. He would not compare himself obsessively to Obama in the middle of active talks. He would not hint at an ultimate alternative while asking the world to trust a peace process. But Trump does the opposite. He brings everything back to himself. Obama's deal, my birthday, my strength, my bombers, my pilots, my threat, my victory, my signing, my timeline, my wall against nuclear weapons, my superior negotiation. That narcissistic structure is not just a personality flaw in domestic politics. In foreign policy, it becomes a strategic vulnerability. Adversaries can exploit it, allies can manipulate it, markets can react to it, hardliners can use it, negotiators can be boxed in by it, and citizens can end up paying the price for it. The source text moves from Iran into Trump's broader public behavior, rambling claims about ships being taken out at night, unsupported allegations of rigged elections in California, strange riffs about electric boats sinking because of attacks on Biden's signature, and repeated efforts to present himself as the only person who understands what is really happening. The point is not that every awkward remark proves incapacity. Presidents misspeak. Politicians exaggerate. Public figures ramble. The point is pattern. When a president repeatedly makes claims that are confusing, unverifiable, self-aggrandizing, or detached from obvious facts, foreign governments notice, allies notice, intelligence services notice, markets notice, domestic opponents notice, so do ordinary citizens. The question becomes not whether one statement is strange, but whether the leader can separate performance from governance when the stakes are nuclear, economic, and global. That is the deeper concern around Trump. Can he stop performing long enough to govern? Can he stop attacking Obama long enough to close a deal? Can he stop seeking a birthday headline long enough to let negotiators finish? Can he stop threatening annihilation long enough to reassure the world? Can he stop inventing dramatic stories long enough to explain the actual terms? Can he stop turning every policy into a loyalty test long enough to act like the president of a country rather than the star of his own show? This is where the health conversation intersects with the governing conversation. It is not responsible to casually diagnose a public figure from clips, but it is absolutely legitimate to evaluate public conduct coherent with the consequences of presidential communication. And the presidency is not a private job. The public has a right to ask whether the person holding nuclear authority is communicating carefully, processing information accurately, and acting in the national interest rather than out of personal grievance. That is not psychiatry, that is democratic oversight. Foreign governments conduct their own assessments. They build profiles, they study habits, they analyze speeches, they watch facial expressions, timing, emotional triggers, and public vulnerabilities. That has always been part of statecraft. What is unusual here is the reported degree to which Iranian negotiators allegedly treated Trump's behavior as a central factor in shaping diplomatic communication. On a minus. If that reporting is accurate, it means Iran was not just negotiating with the United States government. It was negotiating with Trump's moods, needs, and insecurities. That is a frightening thought. Because the United States should not be so dependent on the emotional management of one man. A serious foreign policy system should be institutional. It should include experienced diplomats, military professionals, intelligence analysts, regional experts, legal advisors, allies, congressional oversight, and clear communication channels. The president matters enormously, but the process should not rise or fall on whether he needs a symbolic win on his birthday. The Trump model weakens that institutional structure. It personalizes everything. It turns the presidency into a one-man negotiation brand. That may look strong on television, but it leaves the country exposed when the one man behaves impulsively. The Kennedy Center episode mentioned in the source text is another example of the same pattern. Trump's reaction to his name being removed from a major cultural institution was framed as humiliation and grievance. Whether one sees that incident as symbolic, legal, or political, it fits the broader theme. Trump treats public institutions as extensions of personal image. When the image is challenged, he responds as if the nation itself has been insulted. That is why foreign policy under Trump often feels like domestic ego projected onto the world. Iran is not just Iran. It is a test of whether Trump can prove he is better than Obama. The deal is not just a deal. It is a birthday trophy. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping lane. It is a stage for start-your-engine showmanship. Nuclear diplomacy is not just technical arms control. It is a chance to talk about bombers, mountains, dust, pilots, and ultimate alternatives. Even the possibility of peace is forced to pass through Trump's need to be seen as the author of history. That is dangerous because peace requires humility. It requires accepting imperfect outcomes. It requires letting experts handle the fine print. It requires giving adversaries enough dignity to sign. It requires restraining public rhetoric so the other side can survive its own domestic politics. It requires patience. Trump's style is the opposite of patience. He wants declaration before completion, credit before verification, victory before implementation, personal glory before institutional process. That is why the Iran deal remains so fragile. Even if the framework holds, the hardest part is ahead. A 60-day window for nuclear talks is not a solution. It is a deadline. It is a narrow bridge over a deep canyon, downblending uranium, monitoring facilities, sequencing sanctions relief, reopening shipping, preventing Israeli escalation, satisfying Iranian hardliners, reassuring Gulf states, and keeping Congress informed are all complex tasks. Any one of them can break the process. And every careless post from Trump adds weight to that bridge. This is why the demand from critics is not simply make a deal. It is stop making the deal about yourself. Let the process breathe. Let the diplomats work. Let the technical experts design verification. Let the public see the terms. Let Congress debate the implications. Let allies be consulted. Let the region cool down. But Trump's political metabolism resists silence. He needs to narrate. He needs to dominate the screen. He needs to be praised before the result is secure. He needs to compare, threaten, exaggerate, and personalize. That may win a news cycle. It can lose a peace. The broader tragedy is that America's global credibility is being damaged by the spectacle. When the president publicly insists on a signing that Iran says is not happening, the United States looks unserious. When he hints at extreme military alternatives while claiming peace is near, the United States looks unstable. When he claims terms that may not match the agreement, the United's diplomacy around his birthday, the United States looks like it has been absorbed into one man's vanity project. That is not how a superpower should behave. A superpower should project steadiness, not emotional need. It should be feared for its capability, not mocked for its insecurity. It should be trusted because its commitments are clear, not questioned because its leader posts contradictions. It should be able to separate national interest from personal branding. Trump blurs all of that, and adversaries see it. The most important insight in the source material is not the harshest insult. It is the strategic implication. If Iran believes Trump is driven by ego and instability, then Iran will negotiate accordingly. It will test his timelines. It will deny him symbolic victories. It will exploit his need for public validation. It will watch for divisions between his posts and his negotiators. It will use his threats to empower hardliners. It will use his impatience to extract concessions. That is how perception becomes leverage. In the end, the question is not whether Trump can still force an agreement. He might. A deal may still be signed, the strait may reopen, oil may flow, markets may calm, Trump may declare victory and hold up the document as proof that his method worked. But the deeper question will remain. Was this a strong agreement reached through disciplined statecraft, or a fragile pause reached after chaos made everyone desperate? Did Trump solve the crisis, or did he create conditions so dangerous that even a partial retreat could be sold as peace? Did bombing produce a better deal? Or did America end up returning to the diplomatic logic Trump once condemned? Did the president negotiate from strength or from the urgent need to rescue his own image? Those questions will matter long after the birthday headlines fade. Because nuclear diplomacy is not measured by applause. It is measured by whether the agreement holds when the cameras leave. It is measured by whether inspectors can verify compliance. It is measured by whether shipping remains open. It is measured by whether civilians stop dying. It is measured by whether the next crisis is prevented, not merely postponed. Trump wants the world to see a triumph. But what the world may be seeing is something else. A president so consumed by performance that even his adversaries reportedly plan their diplomacy around managing him. That is the humiliation beneath the spectacle. America should not be a country whose peace process depends on whether its president can be kept calm. It should not be a country whose nuclear diplomacy is entangled with birthday symbolism. It should not be a country where allies, enemies, and markets all have to parse social media posts for signs of escalation. It should not be a country where the line between national strategy and personal ego becomes impossible to see. The Iran negotiations reveal a brutal truth about Trump's presidency. The crisis is never only outside the room. Sometimes the crisis is the person at the center of it.